Good day. I thought I'd bring up some points and talk about how to get the best out of your dog and discuss mostly from a metabolic standpoint. There's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it gets kind of confusing. And so I thought I might try to do a kind of brief summary or overview of the metabolic processes of the dog. Certainly, we've been working with dogs for a long time. We've had a great partnership over the years. They were a great help to us, although society is not quite what it was before. The dog still is a very good friend and a unique companion. It certainly is a working partnership. That work with dogs or compete with dogs have a totally different relationship than a typical pet dog. You have a bond, a working relationship with the dog, and it sometimes can be almost tighter than a typical pet relationship. Although times have changed, the dog still is very driven to work and interact with man or their partner or the individual they're with. They're certainly loyal, obedient, very trainable. But one of the things that we talk about is how do we prepare the body for the activities that the dogs will be performing. And one way to address that is by beginning to understand the metabolic needs of the activity. So I think it's one way to look at it is a performance animal or performance dog could be compared to any elite level machine. I mean, there are multiple systems going on. They all have to be performing at an elite level. Any weakness in one system will affect all the other systems. And once we understand how these systems work, how they interact, we can then focus on how best to prepare them for work and manage them during the performance event. So let's think about performance. There is a huge, wide, diverse area that dogs perform. You can have the racing greyhounds, the running, the sight hounds who compete. But you can also have sprint sled dogs. Sprint sled dogs are different than the metabolism, a little different than a sprint greyhound. But they race a sprint race. It's much shorter than the endurance races we see. You can have hunting dogs that work for long periods of time, from a half hour up to 8 hours. And certainly our detection dogs, our protection dogs, those dogs all perform different tasks for us. And you can design your training and conditioning program around the tasks of the need of the dog. First thing we have to recognize that there's all these different systems that are going to play a role in there. We have the muscular system, the skeletal system, the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, the gastrointestinal system, the renal, hormonal, skin, and then, of course, the special senses. Certainly with hunting dogs and detection dogs and other breeds and other canine activities, the detection, the special senses is very important. And the other thing is you want the dog to be able to not only do it one time, but multiple times throughout a year or for many years. And so we also try to find ways that when we work with the dog that we can reduce the impact of the activity on the dog. I wanted to bring up that you can have an event that is a one-time event. When I used to work with the racing greyhound, the greyhounds typically run one race and they wait a few days till they run again. You can have many events. We talk about agility, or you talk about fly ball or coursing, where you'll have multiple events, or retrievers where you have multiple events in one day. Or you can have events that run over a period of time. You know, if I'm from Florida and I'm driving to Texas to hunt for a week, my dogs are going to be hunting every day. So you have to take into account how the events of one day may play into the next event or into the next day. So one way to look at this is finding ways to avoid negative metabolism. Certainly there is in dog polls or sprint races, it's a high amount of energy over a short period of time, as opposed to maybe a hike where you go hiking in the mountains or a trail somewhere that's more of a low energy activity over a longer period of time. When you're designing conditioning program, you need to say, okay, how long is this going to last? How many days are we going to do it? Are they consecutive days? And then how long are we expecting to do this over a career? The big thing is to remember, okay, I want to minimize my recovery time and relate it to the event overlap. So in this chart here, we see that any sprint or strength exercise typically is a super maximal effort. It's going to reach down into your negative metabolism every time. So you're going to have recovery in those types of scenarios. Endurance or longer events that last longer than 4 to 20 minutes, you can perform an event over a period of time, and then at some point you're going to get fatigued in that state as well. This will require a recovery. One of the things that you can do is condition a dog to be able to maintain their activity throughout the event, so they don't reach into a recovery type state or a negative metabolism. One example of that in the human world is if I'm a mail delivery person and I typically walk 5 miles a day, if I go out and walk 1 mile, that 1 mile may not be a big stressor on my body. If I work in front of a computer all day and I rarely move around, 1 mile might be a stressor for me. So in that example, the person who works at the computer all day and doesn't exercise, somewhere in that mile over for the 4-minute period, I'm going to be into a metabolic stress state or negative metabolic state. Whereas the individual who works for long periods of time may never reach into that. So they can come back the next day without any problem. So there's a complexity to all this. And although our dog is happy running around, it's very hard to understand how complex all the things are that go into this. Certainly there's structural stresses or structural forces at play. There's physiological or metabolic forces at play. And certainly the mental aspect, the drive, the motivation of the dog to do something, or sometimes the fear. Then, of course, we have the special sentences related to detection or eyesight or things that revolve around that. So what are things that are going to hold us back? Well, these are the things we want to try and avoid when we're trying to get the best out of our dog. Certainly we want to avoid pain in the structure somewhere, or we want to avoid any kind of fatigue so that our conditioning program can prepare us for the activity the dog is going to perform. And certainly any psychological factors. We want to condition the dog to, if they're going to have to travel somewhere, understand travel's part of it. They don't have to be worried about it. We want to minimize fear, enhance motivation. A lot of times I'll call it the 3 Ps, the physical structure, physiological activity, or psychological factors. So these things can be broken down into factors. We have internal factors and external factors. Today we're going to mostly be talking about internal factors, where you have anatomical factors, physiological or metabolic factors, or psychological factors. We also have the environment the dog's going into. So we have external factors. We have the environment itself. We have dog interaction with a handler or other dogs or the environment. We have a handler or an owner that's working with the dog. Then there's the functional demands that's going to be placed upon the dog when they're performing the event. Then, of course, the design and boundaries of the event. So what is the energy source for all this that keeps us going? And we talk about the elite machine. You're going to have gasoline or some sort of fuel for energy. In the case, the energy that carries the energy for the dog is adenosine triphosphate. ATP. A lot easier to say that than the other word, isn't it? Anyway, so locomotion or movements created by the actions of the nervous system and the muscular system then moves the bones of the skeleton. So energy is needed for this process, and a huge byproduct of this process is heat. So that's one thing when we think about dogs working, we want to minimize the heat produced, knowing that it's going to be produced. But we need to have the energy in place. So ATP is used all over. So just with the nervous system itself, as the impulses go down, The acetylcholine is released, and we have the action process going down there to all these, and all this needs ATP to do it. So you can have, at some point, you can have fatigue. So, but you got to remember that there's more than just fatigue. You could have muscular fatigue, you could have neuronal fatigue, or you could have a fatigue of both, or an overall fatigue. So what are the sources or stores of these energies? Well, there's immediate energy stores. That's the ATP or creatine phosphate. I've got that shown here where we have ATP and creatine phosphate. Glycolytic energy is glycogen stores, carbohydrates. Or we could have aerobic energy, and most of the aerobic energy is produced by the mitochondria. But there's really something that's neat about the dogs as opposed to the other species, is there's about 3 times the mitochondria in the muscles, and that they have a huge increased ability to use fat as an energy source. So a lot of times we can take information from a human or other species and apply it to the dog, but we have to take into account the variations of the dog's metabolic system. To me, that's a thrill. I've been working with this for over 30 years, and the things that the dogs can do are phenomenal, and the ways we can manage things. I've said it many times, I don't think we've really tapped into all the things we can do to enhance or optimize the ability of the dog. So what happens when something moves? Well, certainly the muscles are involved, and this is just a little busy little slide, but the muscles contracting and then extending, and within that we have muscle cells, and then we have actin and myosin chains that are leveraging on each other to try to allow for this contraction to occur. We need calcium that flows into the cell itself, which allows the head of the myosin to flip around and create. And you got to understand, there isn't just one actin myosin chain, there's a lot. I could say billions, but I may be wrong. I know there's just a lot of them. There could be millions in every action. This is going on all the time. So where does this energy come from to produce the ATP? So here we have a little cycle where ADP is turning into ATP or energy, and there's 3 main sources of energy. There's the proteins, amino acids, carbohydrates, glucose, fructose, galactose, or the simple carbohydrates, but you have complex carbohydrates that provide a lot of energy. And then you have fats and lipids. Some of them can produce energy without, but most of them produce energy that goes into what we call the Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, that diverts energy into the electron transport chain, which creates the ATP that the dog can use. So where do most of this aerobic or energy occur? It occurs in the mitochondria. And like I said, the dogs have more mitochondria than most of the other species. So they're really designed for an aerobic metabolic functions. They're designed to last a long time, to be able to do whatever they got to do, typically maybe to outrun the prey, whatever it is. And so that's why we have so many mitochondria in the muscle cells. Now, typically, when you're not doing anything, you're still doing something. I'm sitting here talking here, and my heart's beating, my lungs are taking oxygen in, CO2 is coming out. I'm kind of moving my hands a little bit, my head's moving. Those are low-level activities, and just even when you're asleep, there's a steady state of energy, and most of that comes from the fatty oxidation, where fat is turned into an energy source and utilized by the body. It's a very efficient energy system, and if you can utilize that for your exercise or activities or out through the day, that's the best system. The problem with it is it's a very complex system. So not only do you have to have the energy source, the fats or the lipids, but you have to have the components of the system in place. And that's where training and conditioning comes into play. The more we train and condition related to our activity, the more the body will supply or prepare those systems to handle the activities over a period of time. So how's this energy presented to the cells? Well, initially you have immediate energy stores, which is the ATP that's in the cells itself, the creatine phosphate, which is storing phosphorus for the ATP to be built in. Myokinase is another system where two ADPs can be turned into one ATP. Usually that'll last over 5 to 30 seconds of an event in the dog. And then once we hit that 30-second time frame, we start to begin the glycolytic energy production, where glucose is being broken down in an anaerobic manner, and that's usually 15 to 30 seconds, up to 2 minutes in the dog. And then once we get above 2 minutes, it's usually an oxidative glycogen glycolysis, where we're utilizing we're utilizing glucose or carbohydrates for energy, because it takes a while for the fat utilization system to ramp up. And it's usually about 15 or 20 minutes. It'll now ramp up and kick in. And then you're tapping into fatty oxidation. So that's why if you're exercising a dog or working with a dog and you only work 10 or 15 minutes each time, you may never actually tap into that to prepare the dog for activities that might last longer than that. So not only is there just activity energy itself, exercise itself changes the metabolic state of the dog. And this is one thing that has just amazed me, and this is really an area that I just love to work in. There was two parts of this. Now, not all dogs do it, but most of the athletic or working dogs, there's an excitement that comes with the approach to work. They're very enthusiastic. And in itself, that excitement, that motivation will actually change the metabolic processes of the dog. And then you have the actual effects of work, where there's an increased effort being produced by the body, so the muscles are needing more energy. It's a very active time, and so then when you get done, there's in a sense a stop or a cessation of work. And so the body then ramps down. So there's two time points there, or two points of reference that related to the dog and their activity. So we set up a project to look at the effects of this excitation or motivation that comes pre-performance as the dog begins and recognizes it's about to work. And we saw that there was significant changes in some of the metabolic properties. We saw an increase in systemic calcium, total bilirubin. We saw a decrease in cholesterol, a decrease in glucose, total protein. But one of the really interesting ones was the insulin went down. So insulin's kind of an interesting thing in itself, and there's many people devote their years of research just to insulin. But typically when you take in a meal, insulin is released to go ahead and store that energy in the body for use later on. Well, when we're running or we're being active, we don't need that energy to be stored. We need it available for us to use. So that's why it was really interesting. We realized this excitation or this anticipation that comes into play creates a drop in the insulin, which means that the energy that comes in during that time frame probably won't get stored. And if you can use a simple carbohydrate, it's just going to be put into the body to be used by the tissues that need it. So it's really important to understand this effect in the dogs. Now, even if a dog isn't excited to work, once they start working, the insulin is still held down. And it maintains its lower levels so that the body can utilize, and you'll see in this, when we saw related work, the glucose went up. Well, glucose is needed in the body for energy, especially the immediate energy that's there. And so that was really an interesting concept. We looked at this about 25 years ago now, I think about it. And it was an interesting introduction to ways that we could work with the dog to enhance or optimize their ability to perform their task. So if we think about it as a timeline, and we think about performance management of the canine athlete, the goal is to condition or train the dog's body systems for the event. And I'm talking about the body systems. prior to it, I'd like to fill up any deficits that might be there. Um, I want to, if I can, continually provide energy and make sure that energy is there during the event. And then when we get done, we want to replenish any deficits that might occur during the event. And then, of course, address any issues that might have arisen during the event. So this is a little slide I made up. I enjoy putting these things together. Not the best at it. I'm a veterinarian. I'm not an artist. And as obviously you can tell, I'm not a professional speaker. But as we look at this, we can see, okay, here we might have the dog's kind of full. His energy reserve's there. He begins. He's got this little lightning bolt says he's excited to go, and he's got this energy. Now he starts to work, and well, his energy starts to get low, maybe a low point. And when they get done, they may be really fatigued or tired with minimal energy. And so in this time period, between a half-hour time period, the body hasn't realized that it's stopped working yet. So it's still designed to take in things. So this creates a little window of time between a half hour and 1 hour that we could actually do some things for the dog that could enhance them for future events. So one of the things I looked at a while back, 22 years ago, could we use a glucose supplement in pointing dogs to enhance their work effort based upon the time frame, the window of time frame there, the timeline that we just talked about, and what's its effects on performance? What we saw was if we gave a glucose supplement, and you can get all kinds of different supplements out there. If we gave it about 15 minutes prior to the work, then that means the insulin doesn't have any reason to rise up because the dog's beginning its work. Even if it's not excited, it'll kick in and then insulin will stay down. And then we found that in both conditioned dogs and unconditioned dogs, that our body temperature didn't go up as much. The heat produced by the dog wasn't as high in the dogs that got that. Then we also, of course, we gave some glucose, but that tells us if we give glucose orally just before an event that it's going into the bloodstream. It's not going out anywhere else, but it's going to the bloodstream, where the dog can use it for energy. So in this case, well, let's go ahead and let's top off our pre-performance energy levels. You can do this many ways. If you give a complex carbohydrate or a fat in that 15-minute time period, the body doesn't have time to break it down to utilize it. So you typically want to avoid those types of sources of energy in this 15-minute pre-exercise time frame because the body just won't have time to tap into it. Now, dogs that are working for long periods of time, half hour, 2 hours, 3, 4, 8 hours, it's not quite as important other than you worry about a large meal going into the stomach. Certainly I don't want any dog to have bloat or anything related to that could come from that. So we try to minimize volumes of food in the stomach just prior to an event, but a small amount, not necessarily a problem. And then so as they go through the event, you've topped them off here. You may be able to give a little bit during the event, and then obviously you give some in this recovery time period. And then that allows you so the dog's not so depleted. And especially if you're going to come into an event, say you're running an agility meet or a flyby event where the dog's going to run again in an hour or so, or a field trial event, retriever field trial, you would give it post-activity, and that would be there for the next run later that day. So then we get into, okay, what about this recovery state, just afterwards, where the body doesn't realize as it's stopped its exercise. So you can actually give glucose or a simple carbohydrate at that time frame, and it actually helps to increase your muscle glycogen stores for further events or next events. There's many things that you can put in there during this time frame. There's all kinds of different products, minerals, vitamins that might be needed and can be put in during this time. So this was just kind of a brief overview of the systems and everything that's involved with how to kind of manage or best prepare your dog for the activity that it's going to go through. This is a very deep and complex area of science, but I thought it'd be kind of nice to do a little overview, just kind of a 40,000 foot level of how these things work and how you might be able to use it for your dog. So appreciate your time spending with me here today, and we'll catch you another time. Thanks so much.